The Atlanta Story is a podcast highlighting Atlanta's most interesting creators, entrepreneurs, and builders. If you are curious, self-starting, and creative, this is the podcast for you. I'm Jon Birdsong with Atlanta Ventures, and in today's episode, we have Hala Moddelmog, CEO of the Metro Atlanta Chamber. Hala was born and raised in Georgia and began her career as a financial analyst at Arby's restaurant group. Over the years, she scaled the corporate ladder and busted glass ceilings, becoming the first woman to lead an international restaurant company as the president of Church's Chicken. Hala transitioned back to the first company she worked for, Arby's, but this time as president and CEO. Over the past 6 years, she's led the Metro Atlanta Chamber through unprecedented growth. We talk about how a chamber can drive real value, initiatives she would have prioritized earlier, and of course, leadership stories along the way. We hope you enjoy the show and subscribe to the Atlanta Story. Welcome to the Atlanta Story. Today we have Hala Moddelmog, and she is the CEO of the Metro Atlanta Chamber. Hala, thanks for being here this afternoon.
Oh, thank you, Jon. I'm excited to do this.
Yes, we have so many things to talk about today, ranging from, of course, the city of Atlanta, but also your personal story and decisions you've made to get to where you are today, and of course, what's ahead. So excited for everyone listening, and let's dive into the interview.
Sounds great.
So, as we all know, you have just announced that you're stepping down as the CEO of the Metro Atlanta Chamber, and many folks in the community have said these are going to be big shoes to fill. Walk us through the last 6 years and what makes it, in your opinion, a good Metro Atlanta Chamber CEO, and what does the shoes being filled mean?
Well, first of all, thank you. I appreciate that kind of compliment there. The thing about the Metro Atlanta Chamber is it is a much, much more complex and richer job than I know that I thought it was when I first came on. So there are, we have the three big pillars. It's economic development. That's why we were founded 161 years ago. We also have public policy, and our team is really strong in that area. We do a lot of state political work, policy work, especially when the session is happening as it is now. And then our third pillar is around communication and marketing. And when we talk about that, it's about marketing Atlanta. And right now, and over these last 6 years, it's been super critical to get talent into this market. So we're trying to make sure that we are marketing to millennials and Gen X and making sure that the people who are here want to stay here and that we can recruit more to come here. So when people say, it's sort of a big job, it's true. It's a fun job. You feel like you can make an impact, and you can touch everything from working on economic mobility, which we desperately need in this market, to sitting around the table with the highest level Fortune 500 CEOs. So it's just, and everything in between.
So let's talk about the characteristics that make a successful Metro Atlanta Chamber CEO, knowing that there's a pretty big search going on right now for the next one?
Well, I think a few things. I mean, number one, I think you got to have a genuine heart for Atlanta. And when I first was asked to interview for this job, I didn't hesitate at all on the part about wanting to be a big booster for Atlanta. I love Atlanta. I believe in Atlanta. I truly, truly believe that if you want to work hard and you want to stay connected, you can make your mark in Atlanta. So I think it has to be somebody who is genuinely enthusiastic and feels that way about Atlanta. Number two, I think it's really great if somebody has a genuine business background. We are a business organization. We do a lot of other things, but I think there's a credibility there that if you've been in the shoes of a CEO and you know what they're trying to do, especially if they're publicly traded, what they're up against, if they're private and growing, the things that you've been engaged in, startups, entrepreneurs, if you can at least talk to them, from a business standpoint, I think that goes a long way in the credibility area. And also just being able to, again, speak with people in the community, again, all the way from, I'm just going to go back to this, from economic mobility issues and the people who need higher wage jobs than they have today, to being able to, court and entertain and convince a Fortune 500 CEO to move their company here.
You've touched on a lot of points that I want to get to, including your experience as president of a massive food company, and then also how to recruit companies to Atlanta. But before we get there, help us understand what led you to the role at the Metro Atlanta Chamber CEO. Like, why did you apply to it, and how did it fit into kind of your narrative where timing is everything, we all know?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I had just come off of being the president of Arby's roast beef here in Atlanta, and I knew I didn't want to leave Atlanta. A couple of other job options came up, but I knew I wanted to stay in Atlanta. I had really made that decision. And so the timing was right for me. And I was, a little bit on in my career, and just thought, wow, what an incredible way to be a part of giving back to Atlanta. And so, I had done nonprofit before, but I'd mostly been in the for-profit world. And I can tell you this, I actually think the for-profit world is easier than nonprofit because it's pretty straightforward. You kind of know the numbers you're trying to hit, and your purpose is pretty clear in that regard. But it was good timing for me. And one thing I'll say about the next person coming in, I think it's kind of time for the next generation to come in and be the leader at the Metro Atlanta Chamber. So for me, it was good timing, and now I think it's time to do something else.
Yeah. When you came into the Metro Atlanta Chamber, did you have a clear vision of, I want to be here for X number of years and I want to get the city of Atlanta from here to here, or did you come in with a game plan to just make things more efficient?
Well, certainly more than just make things more efficient. I mean, we did a bit of that, but it was much more around what can we do in Atlanta that maybe hasn't been done or talked about as much as it needed to be. And part of that is, again, when I first came, one of the first things that I said to the staff, and I think they were a little bit surprised, but it was about 6 years ago, people were talking a lot about what's happening to middle class jobs, and so it was really at an inflection point, I think, in our country, and Atlanta was facing it too. And so one of my goals was, let's see what we can do at the chamber to make sure that we are driving those middle class jobs again. And now we talk about it a little bit differently, but we've got larger companies that are getting more efficient. We have startups, and then we have those scaling companies, those middle market companies, those companies that are scaling, and that's where the jobs are being created. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to put a little more specific focus on that group. And otherwise, I didn't have a number of years that I wanted to do it, but frankly, I've been here longer than I thought, but that's just how invigorating the work has been.
When you think of chambers, not just in Atlanta, but other cities, I mean, the reputation of the Metro Atlanta Chamber is one that's legitimate and makes an impact. Why is that in Atlanta versus other cities where it may have a reputation of just kind of being a figurehead?
You know what? Atlanta is unique in this regard. I really believe that. And one of the things that I always go back to is the Metro Atlanta Chamber is what it is because of our leaders, our, again, Fortune 500 CEOs, our scaling company CEOs, people that are in your world that are willing to work with us and be a part of it. And the thing about Atlanta, and I'll give you my best example. It's a little bit of an anecdote. But when Mercedes-Benz was talking about moving their company from New Jersey, we were the competition with Dallas. And so they went out to Jerry Jones's suite, with the Cowboys and met a bunch of their business people. And we brought them to Atlanta, and we had a dinner at the High Museum, and we had a lot of Fortune 500 CEOs at that point. We had David Abney from UPS, we had Richard Anderson from Delta at the time, and Paul Bowers at Georgia Power, and just a lot of people sitting around that table. And the comment to us from Mercedes-Benz about the reason they chose Atlanta over Dallas was, your CEOs know each other, they like each other, They're willing to talk about what's good here, what's bad here, what needs to be fixed. And we believed that if we came to Atlanta, we would be welcomed into that CEO community, and the business community would work together to solve problems and not just be competitive. And that's a pretty special thing.
Absolutely. CEOs are not working in silos, and y'all are building that kind of serendipitous relationships and being intentional about the community aspect, which is great. Atlanta is known as a city too busy to hate. Have you seen, how has that evolved over time?
I think that phrase is outdated. It might have been a good phrase to use about us back in the day, back literally during the civil rights movement, when other cities were spending a lot of time hating, and our different groups were getting together talking about how we're going to do business, how we're going to do politics, how's this area going to move forward. So it probably worked then, but I think Atlanta is so much richer than that now. Our diversity is off the charts. And when we're courting companies or we're trying to get people to move here, we talk about the built-in diversity in this market. The people coming out of Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech graduates more Black engineers than any other school, more women engineers than any other school. Georgia State graduates more African Americans than any other school in the country. We have the 4 HBCU schools, and our culture, driven by hip hop and things that are wildly popular all over the universe, but it's driven from a culture that has diversity at its core. So I believe that phrase is no longer the right phrase. I think our phrase should be more forward-thinking and more uplifting.
Sure.
I think it's more than that.
Absolutely. And you're one to have broken records and forged through. In 1995, you were the first female to lead an international food restaurant group, Church's Chicken. Did you know that what you were doing was legendary, or was it just more of a, oh, this is neat,
Yeah. Well, it did become something because the restaurant trades, talked about it quite a bit, because it probably was a bit of a big deal in the restaurant industry because I was the first woman. But for me, it was just like, wow. Somebody asked me to interview to be the president of this little brand that I love, and that we have, restaurants in 15 countries, and it's growing, and I just was so excited about it. So for me, it was like, yeah, well, of course, let's go. But it was kind of a bit of a breakthrough, and now there's so many wonderful women CEOs in food service, and really, there are not plenty, let me take that back. There are a lot, but not enough. I mean, so we still have a very small proportion of, again, women who are CEOs of Fortune 500. So we'd like to see more, but the breakthroughs do matter.
Yeah. Talk to us about your leadership style when it comes to that level of draw to bring into the CEO level, right? I mean, you've obviously been recruited numerous times throughout your career, and what are the things that, whether it's your values or your style, that makes it's so compelling for folks to recruit you?
Well, I don't know for sure, but I do like to think that I am an authentic person, and I know that has kind of been overemphasized these days. Everybody talks about the authenticity, and the only way you can market to people is through authentic gestures, and I certainly believe that. But I've always just sort of been who I am. And again, I enjoy, taking my food service days. I enjoyed everyone from the people in the restaurants and what they were trying to do, because I knew how hard it was for them. And, you're standing by a hot fryer all day, but you're making the money for the people who are sitting up in the offices and that kind of thing, all the way up again to the CEOs. And I'm very curious about a lot of different people. And I think that matters. And then, at the end of the day, you get the results. And that's kind of the way, I felt like that I shouldn't be in any job that I didn't get results from. And so pretty focused on that.
So I want to take it back to the Metro Atlanta Chamber days and talking about results. You shared with us the Mercedes-Benz story of ways to recruit, but there were also some other big companies that relocated. The Pulte Group.
Mm-hmm.
How does a Metro Atlanta Chamber CEO recruit to Atlanta? Dinners, of course, at the High help.
Mm-hmm.
But like, what are some strategies that work?
Well, here's the real truth of the matter on economic development. It is without a doubt a team sport, and that's one thing you have to realize from the very beginning. And we talk about public-private partnerships a lot in this market, and the economic development recruiting team is so much a very good example of public-private partnerships. You've got the state of Georgia; they've got a great team at the Georgia Economic Development Department. They've got the incentive dollars and a great team. And then you've got Georgia Power, and Georgia Power is the oldest economic development group in the state, because that's what they did back in the day, is to get people here to use more electricity. And then you've got the Metro Atlanta Chamber. So almost all of these big deals, and we've had BlackRock, we've had Honeywell move 2 or 3 of their big divisions here, a lot of great wins. But again, they've all been because these 3 groups, and Invest Atlanta sometimes, if it's in the city limits, in Fulton County when it's different places, Gwinnett, et cetera. But it's definitely a team sport. So you put those groups together and you show them the data, some of that diversity of talent data that I talked about, some of the not only diversity in terms of the people, but the diversity of the companies here, because our economy in Atlanta with our large companies is so diverse that we really mirror the rest of the U.S. That's the level of diversity and types of companies we have here. So we just have a lot of things that are attractive from the beginning looking at us.
And we're going to take a quick break here and share that this podcast is brought to you by Atlanta Ventures. If you are looking to start the next $300 million business out of Atlanta, check out the studio at atlantaventures.com. So public-private partnerships, I want to piggyback off that. That's a term that's thrown around a lot. And when I think of that, I think of like the Woodruff Arts Foundation, and that's more maybe nonprofit, but that makes a difference, right? When that much money is poured into the city, where on the public-private partnerships, like if you could say, hey, this part of a public-private partnership is the most impactful, all the way down from A to C, like give us a good example of a public-private partnership. I get that all three or 4 entities collaborating are important, but give us something very tactical that is a home run.
I'll go back to literally the founding of Atlanta. Okay, so Atlanta doesn't have your natural barriers for a city. There's, our rivers kind of far away from where we are now. There's no big river going through. There's no big mountains that everybody's looking at to make a city. But the government wanted to build a terminus. That's what was our original name, because they wanted some place to get the goods from the Port of Savannah to come through and then go out west. So the government gave the right-of-way. So there you're getting the right-of-way done by the government, and then the private railroad companies came in and built the railroads. So that's one of the most beautiful examples of public-private partnership you ever see. Yeah, we know how to do it. Yeah. So there are hundreds of examples. And when you have a CID, when you have these pockets in Atlanta where people want to have the private companies that are in the buildings there, pay a little bit money into getting something done around transportation or other beautifications. I mean, we're good at this in Atlanta, really good at it.
What are the 2 or 3 initiatives going on right now at MAC or Metro Atlanta Chamber that must continue?
Well, we're never going to give up the 3 things I mentioned. We're going to do economic development, we're going to do public policy, and we're going to market this market, because that's what we were born to do. But there is another a couple other things I really do want to emphasize. And one of them is, again, around what we're referring to as inclusive innovation and inclusive capital. Because the thing about Atlanta, again, we've got so many wonderful things, but there are people in the startup world, in the entrepreneurial world, in the scaling world that are getting left behind simply because they don't have the access that some other people do. So as we're looking at the innovation ecosystem writ large, from corporate innovation down to somebody developing a new sandwich, let's say, I mean, everything in between, and entrepreneurs and startups, et cetera, people need access and they need connection points in that ecosystem. So we have started a lot of work in that area, and we've referred to it as Plato, Plato, the philosopher, just because we wanted to think about people learning from people older, people younger. So it's multi-generational, multicultural, and it really is about creating access for more people. So that's got to stay. And we've got a big stake in the ground. I've written it into the job description, so I'm not worried about it going away. And then one other thing that we've done a lot of, and I think this is really important because, again, when you get back to talking about things like economic mobility, and I think Atlanta's numbers in economic mobility are not good. We're like the 48th out of 50 top metros in terms of if you're born into the low quintile, you have a 4.5% chance of making it to the top quintile. So that's a problem. So we've got issues here that we've got to work on. So we have every quarter since I've been there, we've met with the Atlanta Regional Commission, United Way, the Community Foundation, and us to talk about some of these bigger, broader issues that, then again, you can kind of get back to public-private almost. So you've got some of the public dollars coming in, you've got the business community looking, and then you've got the foundations and the people who are already working in this area. Because if we don't bring everyone along, we're never going to be all we can be. And frankly, we need more people upskilled to take some of the jobs that we have available right now.
Absolutely. Very, very good stuff, and there's definitely a lot to be done, a lot to be done. So, with that being said, wave a magic wand, knowing what you know today. Let's take it back 6 years ago to when you started. What would you have done differently?
You know what? I think I would have started the work on more access for entrepreneurs, startups, scaling companies. I think I would have started that work sooner. Sometimes things just come together when they come together and you get enough people, kind of on the train. I mean, Raphael Bostic, for one, coming to the Federal Reserve, he's been somebody who has really helped us with this. Our relationships with people like Paul Judge, Kamal Bob, who's at Google and Georgia Tech, Russell Stokes from GE, people who care about this. We've gotten those people together, and they're helping us along the way. Accenture has done a gigantic pro bono project. So, but I wish I'd started that a little bit earlier. But we had to build some credibility, frankly, with some of these groups that aren't normal chamber people.
Sure. I know at the Atlanta Tech Village, particularly with Atlanta Ventures, all of the events that we host here are free. And whether it's Atlanta Startup Village or Atlanta Startup Combos, I mean, we are bringing entrepreneurs to come in and share their story of things they did to get to where they are, and that access is critical. And so,
it really is. I'm really glad you guys are doing that.
So let's talk about your childhood, and I know you're a bulldog.
Yes, true.
And got to be careful in the tech village. There's a lot of yellow jackets.
Oh, I love Georgia Tech. Don't make no mistake. But when it comes to football, I am a bulldog. So, yeah.
Did you always know you were going to go into business and then evolve into more of the philanthropic world?
Not really. My major was English as my undergrad, and my minor was journalism, and then my master's is in journalism. But my major professor in journalism, I met him, like the very first week I was there, and he said, what is your goal? And I said, well, my goal is to get out of here and make some money because I paid for my undergraduate myself and my graduate school myself. So I was just very straightforward with him. And he's like, well, let's get on your thesis right now. So we did a thesis that really trained me in research and a lot of, math skills and that kind of thing. So my first job out of graduate school was at Arby's as a sales analyst. So I did go straight from these, liberal arts majors into a business role and kind of never look back except for the philanthropic pieces with the 2 nonprofits that I've led. But yeah, I grew up in a small town in Georgia, kind of the all-American family. I have an older brother, younger sister, wonderful mother and father. But my mother died when I was 17 and she was 42. And that was a little bit of a wake-up call to me. It just made me realize that, nothing is given and you just don't know what's going to happen. So I think it made me a little bit stubborn and a little bit independent. And I just went out there and said, look, I got to make sure I can take care of myself before I get married, have my own family. It just kind of gave you a little bit of a wake-up call. So I feel like I had a fabulous childhood.
And when you took the Arby's role, in the back of your mind, were you saying one day I want to be president, CEO?
I don't know if I actually went that far. I try to be honest about that because I do remember as just a little girl thinking, oh, wouldn't it be cool to be the president of something? Of course, I didn't know what that meant. But maybe when I took the Arby's role, but I did know that I wanted to do more, and more because every other role, the next role just looks like so much fun and, so much more engaging. And the thing about, getting to be the CEO is that you get to touch everything. And that's the beauty of it. You're not just focusing on one area. So all along, I wanted to touch more. I know that much.
Help us educate the graduating seniors from Georgia Tech. What advice would you have for them today, knowing that they're going into this digital world and, from someone that's seen it firsthand?
Yeah, it's interesting because the jobs are so different and there's so much data about how incredibly different they're going to be. But my advice would be the same advice I've given all along and just to do something you love. I mean, because, that saying, I've never worked a day in my life because I've loved what I've done. And I feel that way. I mean, I've loved every job I've had. I've loved the interaction with people. And I know not everybody is super social, but just, make sure you're with people you like, people you trust, and do something that you feel is making a difference and it's important to you and especially if things are really changing and work is going to be very different, then I think we're going to need to hang on to something that feels like there's a value there.
Sure. So let's talk about some of the daily grind and joy from the Metro Atlanta Chamber, right? Because the saying, about, if you love what you do, you don't work a day, and but there had to be some days when you were like, I can't believe this. The 85 is burning down.
yeah, there were a couple of those. Well, there not to talk about politics, but over time there have been a few bills that have tried to come up in the state, and those have been kind of tough, and I was really pleased, back in the day when Governor Deal vetoed the religious liberty bill. So those were, felt like trying times, but they felt very important, and I was really proud of the business community and the way they came together, especially to support the LGBTQ community and things like that. So everything that had maybe a little bit of a angst to it, there's been really mostly good outcomes. And
I do feel like the Metro Atlanta Chamber is such a powerful voice, especially in the city of Atlanta versus ITP OTP debate, right? I mean, it's a powerful position to take on particular issues because if you have the business community behind you, you can do a lot.
Well, here's the thing. The business community that we have at the chamber, they've got 1 million people that work for them that are voting, right, for starters. And then we are downtown and we love being downtown, but the Metro Atlanta Chamber covers 29 counties, and so it's really regional. So when we're representing, we're trying to make sure that we really are representing those other counties. I think I've already mentioned Gwinnett and Cobb and a few others in Fulton, and we really want to try to represent, the broader business community. And you're right. I mean, I think because the business community here has proven that they care to get things done in the market. And again, it's not that they tell their people how to vote, but I think our business community tries to reflect the values of their employees.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. What is Atlanta going to do to fix this traffic problem?
Well, if I knew that, I wouldn't be sitting here, and neither would you, because we'd all have it figured out. We, as everybody knows, we started our transit system back when Seattle and Washington, D.C. did, and then we kind of didn't finish it. Yep. And, I feel very encouraged that we have the transit the ATL that's together, and places like Gwinnett County will vote again soon, hopefully, on whether to have transit go there. And I think our other counties will come along. I mean, we are behind in that way, and it's really unfortunate because, again, I believe that it's another thing. Atlanta won't be all it can be until we fix this. But if we put it in perspective, I mean, we are, the way we talk about traffic here, you'd think we were the worst trafficked place in America, and we're really not.
LA.
Exactly. You could kind of go on and on, Chicago, et cetera. But it is what it is for us, and we have to work on it. But I'll tell you the other thing about our conversation around traffic. We say two things. A, if you're growing, you're going to be congested, number one. Number two, we talk about it now in terms of, again, access. So we need to make sure that people who live in communities that aren't close to their jobs and already are overburdened by housing cost and transit cost, and maybe they don't have a car, that we can get them to good paying jobs. So instead of thinking about it always for people like the two of us who may get aggravated in a little extra traffic, we want to make sure that we're providing access for health care, access for people to get to jobs and be able to be near their kids, and things that, that we may not think about all the time. And if we solve if we solve that one problem, we'll start to solve the other.
Right. I mean, over the next decade, Atlanta's going to grow by hundreds of thousands of people a year. And it's something that I know is on the minds of a lot of folks. And
well, there's one thing that I hope people think about, and that's bus rapid transit. Because putting in the hard rail, which I'd love it if we had more hard rail, but that's a long haul. It's very expensive. It takes a long time. So you've got the BRT. You've seen that in some markets, I'm sure. And there are ways to do light rail and some other things that could be faster, that may be the way we have to go.
Interesting. What are some of what two biggest things that or movements and initiatives you're most proud of during your time?
Well, one of them is backed by ATL. And so, again, I go back to sort of the things that we've learned from people like David Cummings and Bill Nussey and kind of Tom Noonan and those guys, saying, what can we do to really help the companies that are not your gigantic Fortune 500? So, some of their comments were, there's a lot of activity around your startups, but what about those companies that are truly scaling? They're trying to get the right talent in there. They may be looking for Series C or something else, but they're really scaling. And what can we do for them? So we started this program about 3 years ago. We took in 8 companies on our first cohort, I think 7 in our second, then 5. And these we work with to give sort of a white glove, customize working with them to see how we can help them grow. Now, we know they're going to grow, or we're pretty sure they're going to grow, or they don't get in the program. It's totally free to them. But it's also, we think we hopefully could help them grow faster, maybe even better. So we put them in front of our executive committee, which again are mostly the Fortune 500s, and let them present their product. And we've had a couple of really good outcomes there where they got access to some of their very biggest customers that they maybe wouldn't have gotten that access to. And so we're very excited about it. And we have everybody in there from VJ at Pin Drop, who probably doesn't need a lot from us, but he did get a good deal coming out of one of our meetings too. We got Ryan Wilson at The Gathering Spot. So just some really cool companies.
That's beautiful. Help us understand who are some of the folks, I guess. Well, back to recruiting real quick, because I do want to bring that back to some of the things. How important is our local sports, right? We saw some significant travesties, particularly with the Super Bowl a few years ago that we played in, but also with Atlanta United winning the championship. From your perspective, how does sports play a role into the momentum of the city?
I think sports are really important. I think we're a sports town. I know, people try to say we're not, and that we're fair weather friends sometimes, and I just don't buy it. I think sports are really important to us. The Sports Council is that Dan Corso runs is with us at the Chamber, so that's one of the reasons I talk about it many times. Is just being another good marketing tool. And then when you've got all the big sports here, and then you add Atlanta United and what they've done in such a short period of time, it's amazing, and it's a real attraction point, especially for younger people. And you've probably heard this number, but the number of season ticket holders for the Falcons versus the season ticket holders for Atlanta United, there's only something like a 5 or 6% overlap. So that just lets you know, and we tell companies that we're recruiting that because they're like, okay, I've got my football people here, I've got my Atlanta United kind of profile, and they like knowing that this market attracts both kinds of people. Yeah. So where our sports are, they're important.
Interesting. So you can use it as a data point to tell the story.
Absolutely. And we're working super hard on 2026 and the World Cup. And I think some good things should come for that. So that's going to be our next big push. You'll hear the people at the Metro Atlanta Chamber talk about that a lot.
Will any new happenings with downtown happen between now and then in terms of development or?
I hope so. I really do, because that's 6 years from now. But some of the things that we put out there to do, we say, look, 2026, that's our bellwether and everything. And I hate to not be there for that, but somebody else in the next generation will knock it out of the park for then.
Awesome. We're about to wrap up. Just a few more questions. Favorite restaurants in town?
You know what my favorite restaurant in this town is? Jalisco.
Yes.
Yes, and because I've been going there since I was, I think, a teenager, and every part of my life, Jalisco has been important to me, and I love that place, and it's always too crowded, so I shouldn't be advertising it.
And then we always wrap up the Atlanta Story podcast with two questions. One, why Atlanta, knowing that you could have lived anywhere else? And then what has Atlanta done for you?
Well, why Atlanta? Again, if you grew up in a small town in Georgia, Atlanta is your first line of defense. And I love Atlanta, and I moved here right after graduate school and all that. But I did say to myself at one point, wow, I thought you were adventurous, and I hadn't lived out of the state of Georgia. So I moved to Tucson, Arizona for a while. I did Dallas, Texas for a while, but I always came back. So Atlanta in a sense kind of chose me because it was right. And then my extended family is here. But, what has Atlanta done for me? I mean, Atlanta's given me everything. I mean, I just really believe, and I just think there's so many examples. You can make your mark here. Again, if you have an ounce of wanting to give back, if you have an ounce of get up and go, Atlanta will let you do things in this market. People will join with you, and you can make your mark here. And I just feel so happy that Atlanta gave me a chance.
Hala, thank you so much for being on the Atlanta Story.
Thank you.
This podcast is brought to you by Atlanta Ventures. It was co-produced by JC Lucas and Jon Birdsong. If you are looking to start the next $300 million business in Atlanta, check out the studio at atlantaventures.com and the companies we work with who've done it before. Thank you for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed it, please share it at your next coffee meeting or dinner greeting, rate it, and write a benevolent, eloquent review.